Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us here today on Navy Sports Central. I am your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, we will be breaking down the Navy lightweight rowing team's national championship run, and I'll be doing that with the help of two very special guests. So please, stay with us. We'll get going here in a second. All right, we are back. Thanks for joining us, everyone, especially if you are a first-time listener. We're going to go ahead and jump right into things with our sports update. And we are going to start with men's gymnastics. The U.S. National Championships were held in Fort Worth, Texas this past weekend. And this event is a direct path to the Olympic trials, by the way. And Navy did send one competitor. His name was Ryan McVeigh, who qualified in the all-around competition. He registered 3 top 20 finishes, and those came in the floor exercises, the high bar, and the pommel horse. That helped him finish 23rd overall in a pretty competitive field that included several potential Olympians. And by the way, both days of this meet were televised, so Ryan, way to represent on the national stage, and congratulations on a great Navy gymnastics career. Okay, let's move on to swimming. We are between waves 1 and 2 of the U.S. National Championships. And the Mids sent a record number of 25 swimmers to this event in Omaha, Nebraska. Moving on to the second wave, which starts on June the 13th, will be Sydney Harrington in the 100 butterfly and the 50-meter freestyle. And she is a rising senior, so class of 2022. And both Ethan Tack, who qualified in the 200-meter individual medley, and Chris Bondarowitz, who qualified in the 100 and 200-meter breaststrokes, just graduated a couple weeks ago. So again, congratulations to all the mids who qualified for nationals, and continued good luck to these 3 terrific competitors. Okay, now let's move on to sailing. And I know we don't talk a lot about this sport, which is kind of weird since we are talking about the Naval Academy after all. But guess what? When you pull down 2 national championships within 7 days of each other, that's going to get the spotlight turned on you pretty quickly. So first of all, the mids won the Intercollegiate Sailing Association Laser Performance Team Race Competition, and that was a lot of words there. Those took place right there in Annapolis on June 2nd and 3rd. It consisted of a series of races over those 2 days, and the mids compiled a pretty impressive 17-2 record, and that got them their first national championship in this event since 1992. Then, just 4 days later, they took home another trophy. This one was in the co-ed national championship competition, and the mids were in control of that one throughout both days. They won it for the first time since 1995, so congratulations to Coach Ian Berman and the entire sailing team on just an awesome performance. And by the way, if you have a chance to jump on the Navy Sports website or on the Navy Sports Nation Facebook page, the post that I put up, I believe, let me think about this, it was June the 9th, we'll call it, shows the sailing team with the hardware that they won. And let me tell you, that's pretty impressive. Looks like both of those things weigh about 30 or 40 pounds each. But as my friend Scott Gordon pointed out, the most important thing is how much champagne they hold. So I thought that was a pretty good observation. Again, congratulations to the Navy sailing team. Just a terrific job winning 2 national championships inside of 7 days. Nice work. All right, we're going to finish up here with men's and women's rowing. We'll start with the women first. They went down to Sarasota, Florida to compete in the NCAA championships over the Memorial Day weekend, and they ended up with a top 20 finish, so not bad. The mids finished 18th overall, and this was their 6th straight trip to the national championships, so they're building a really strong legacy, and you know they're going to be looking to improve on that next year. While the women were down in Sarasota, Florida, the men's rowing teams were competing in the IRA championships up in West Windsor, New Jersey. By the way, the IRAs are the equivalent of the NCAAs on the women's side. And in the opening, you did hear that the lightweight team won the national championship. We're going to put that discussion off for just a little bit and really get into it in our next segment. As far as the heavyweight team goes, they performed extremely well also. They placed all 4 boats in the top 10 with their 3rd varsity crew, ended up finishing a strong 5th in their race. So that helped them nail down a 6th place finish overall. Congratulations to the heavyweight rowing team on a great championship weekend. All right, so that gets you guys up to speed. Let's take a short break and we'll be back with our deep dive segment. And before I forget, I know that when I was wrapping up the podcast a couple of weeks ago, I said that we would be continuing with our Navy football preview by talking about the defensive line. But I decided to call an audible after the lightweight team rung up that national championship. So we're going to pick back up with the football preview in the next podcast. All right, welcome back to Navy Sports Central, everybody. Now, you just heard me mention in the sports update that the men's lightweight rowing team did win the IRA National Championship. So that's what we're really going to get into now. I've mentioned before in the blog and on the podcast that I've become a big fan of Navy rowing. And it was a little over 2 months ago that I had an opportunity to interview Coach Rob Friedrich on our second episode. And we talked about the mids taking home the King's Cup at the 2019 Henley Royal Regatta. So today, I've got not one, but two subject matter experts to help me take a look at the lightweight rowing team's national championship effort. With me are my classmates Scott Gordon and Tom Callahan. They are both rowing alums, and they've also been largely responsible for educating me on the sport and turning me into such a huge fan. So Gordy and Tom, thanks very much for taking the time to join me on the podcast. Before we get going, I was wondering if each of you could take a quick minute to share a little bit about your rowing experience while at the Naval Academy. In other words, what did you value most about it? And I guess while we're at it, talk about what you're glad that you don't have to do anymore. So Gordy, let's go ahead and start with you first.
Right, Carl. Thanks. Thanks for having me on the your podcast. I really appreciate that and being on board with Tom as well. Tell you what, the biggest thing was just the amount of great guys I got to be teammates with. A little apprehensive. I was a recruited rower. There may be about 8 or 9 of us. And then we sat in the Halsey Fieldhouse, and there were probably about 200 people that showed up because Kenny Dreyfus was the recruiting coach. Pretty much if you were over 6'1", he sent you a letter. And a lot of folks showed up, and they were all at the Halsey Fieldhouse introduction to rowing. And son of a gun, a lot of the core of the crew over the 4 years that we had were folks who never touched an oar before. Just great teammates. They walked on, and it was that competition that was just key to sparked us to going forward and being really, really fast over the years.
Okay, cool. Tom, how about you?
Yeah, I was aware of rowing, Carl, growing up in Buffalo, New York. We have a fabulous club there, Westside Rowing Club. Historic output of great rowers, which I did not make my way over to their boathouse to join in high school, and frankly became a frustrated swimmer in the first couple weeks of plebe summer, having to balance between getting in the pool or studying my rates. And another of my company mates, also a former swimmer who had jumped over to the boathouse, I sort of followed him, Dave Marin, who's doing triathlons these days still. I followed him over there. I wound up staying with it. I think he ended after the summer. But as Gordy said, it's a great boathouse. I don't think anyone on the lightweights had touched a row before. And it was a great experience. I think you asked what's the one thing I'm glad that I don't have to do anymore. Certainly make weight for the boat. I was the 148 guy that had to drop the weight for the guys that wanted to have their nachos during the week. And also the erg machines back then were just absolute galley slave ship punishment.
Right.
And so I have come to accept the concept to erg a little bit better than those galley slave ergs that we had back then.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I just flashed on that movie Troy when they were rowing towards the beaches, and Ajax is like yelling, "Greeks are dying!" And he like hauls this dude. He just like pulls him right off of his oar and just jumps in there and starts rowing. I thought that was pretty funny, but
it was sort of like that when we had to do our timed pieces. That you basically just at the end of your 6 minutes or whatever, they just pulled your body off and threw another one on there.
Well, speaking of classic movie is in Ben-Hur when they're rowing and they're really doing well in the heat of battle. It's row well and live. And matter of fact, one of the Marine Corps commands up in Quantico has that as their motto.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, so to start things off, I wanted to get the listeners on the same page regarding the significance of this national championship. I know that folks that aren't familiar with rowing may not be familiar with the term IRA and what it means. So, Gordy, I know you've done a little bit of you stayed really close to the sport, since graduating, and you follow everything pretty closely. So I was wondering if you could kind of, set the table for the discussion as it relates to the IRA versus NCAA and such.
Gladly, Carl. Yep. Everyone, I think, walking around in America pretty much can talk about the NC2As, governing body, most universities, Division 1, 2, and 3. It covers, every sport, you name it, but with the exception of men's rowing. And as you mentioned, that's covered by the Intercollegiate Rowing Association. That as a governing body started in, 1891 by a couple of the Ivy schools. And it was in response to the Yale-Harvard competition that they would have their 4-mile race on the Thames River in Connecticut. So all the other Ivy felt excluded, so they started this race, and it started in upstate New York, and they would do a 4-mile for the varsity, 3-mile for the junior varsity, and I think it was only 1 or 2 mile for the freshmen. And over the years, from 1891 all the way until present day, it was kind of an exclusive Ivy club. Then they invited Navy in 1907. Heavyweights have been rowing for now, 153 years. Lightweights for 103 years, I think. So the IRA kept on growing and growing. Then they'd bring in a few land grant schools, Boston University, Washington, Cal, etc. And then once they kind of exhausted, bringing those other larger, more storied programs in to try to survive in this day and age where there a lot of schools started their rowing programs, they opened up their aperture to the Drexels, to Temple, to a lot of schools that weren't traditionally in there that would row in the Dad Vale League, which is a smaller league, good, but not quite the Ivy, stature of the IRAs. Hopefully I cover that fairly well.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. So now that we've got everything set there, I wanted to kind of jump into the season itself. I didn't want to go back too far, but one of the things that kind of struck me about how the spring went for the lightweight team is that, obviously the pandemic wiped everything out last year. I mean, there was no events at all. And then this year, it was somewhat impacted because the schedule was reduced. Now, I kind of did some poking around and realized that during the spring session, usually there are about 7 rowing events for both the lightweights and the heavyweights on the well, maybe the heavyweights have more, but certainly with the lightweights, there's 7 events on the schedule, including the Eastern Sprints. Whereas this year, there was only 4, and the Eastern Sprints weren't part of that. So my question, and I'll ask Tom to jump in on this, when you think about your days rowing back then, and you look at the number of events, I'm guessing that there's probably some sort of strategy towards building up to, say, for instance, the Eastern Sprints, and then like 2 weeks later were the IRAs. So this time around, there were no Eastern Sprints, so there's like a 5-week layoff in between. So my question is, do these kinds of layoffs affect you guys as athletes, when you're in there, rowing day in and day out for practice, or is it kind of a welcome change? And based on how things were scheduled this year with the reduced number of competitions, were you expecting this kind of outcome from the lightweight team based on the abbreviated schedule?
I think, Carl, the biggest help that a race gives you is a comparison, a data point as to where your fitness is. As a rower, I always thought, I'm starting to think a little bit differently now, but as a rower, I always thought that when I was at the start line and the flag went down, that you were now open throttle going and you were racing the other crew. Today, I have the impression that you're not really racing the other crew. You're executing your ability, and you're just going to compare your ability to that other crew. And certainly the cleanliness of your stroke, the togetherness of it, the strength, helps determine whether or not you're operating on the full efficiency that your coaches have gotten you to. So I think without having the racing every week, you don't get to validate where you are. It's a mystery as to where you're going to compare against the other crews, and it might be a little bit, you want to have that confidence that you know where you are so that when you're on the course, and your coxswain's telling you to think about your strokes and execute cleanly and to do your power sessions, that you have the confidence that you're going to last the course out and win. That it's not a drag race. You're executing your abilities. And from watching the prep last summer of the King's Cup crew, there was many weeks where they were just, after the IRAs, they were back to practice. And I think the coaching staff at Navy has an incredible ability to get their crews working very efficiently and building their capability to be able to execute. And I think that's what we saw in the IRAs. They rode their race. They dominated each of the races, and in a collective and calm way, at a rate higher than I can row today.
Right.
Carl, if I could add, Tom, that was awesome. And I second what Tom says. They also handily beat some heavyweight programs that they had in their shortened race schedule, and they did very, very well. They traded a little bit between GW and Jacksonville on a couple of different boats between the first, second, and third varsity, but they had a really good race season, and getting to watch video of them was incredible. Very smooth. They really built on the success they had in 2019.
Right. And I want to get into that even a little bit more. And we'll start with a comment that Coach Bagnall made after the IRAs were over. They were talking to him in the post-race interview, and he made a point of speaking about the development of the walk-on athletes and the role they played in the team's success. So what I was curious about, and I kind of got a little bit of an inkling as to the types of athletes that they might be looking for here, but I was wondering if you could kind of get into that a little bit more in terms of athletic background. Is there a particular type of athlete that makes for a decent, for a rowing athlete that has decent potential to contribute if he or she decides to kind of come on board and give rowing a try?
Well, one thing I want to set is the notion of walk-on athlete. I think a lot of times when a football team or a baseball team has a walk-on athlete, it's somebody that actually played the sport before. But really, when we talk about walk-on at Navy or walk-on at rowing, they don't even know what an oar is. So there are walk-on athletes that weren't recruited that rowed in high school just because they weren't on the radar or whatever. But there are by my assessment, half of the lightweight team has no credentials in rowing before going there. And frankly, there were so many rowers, I was going through their bios, and I got up to the G's and got exhausted. But in A through G, half of them had some kind of rowing experience, or they were swimmers or cross-country runners.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's this swimmer cross-country runner that works well. And I think the Academy is a great place to have walk-on rowing because we are a very fit school. My coach, the last 2 years at Navy, he later went on and earned a silver medal in the '84 Olympics, Tom Kiefer. Mm-hmm. He rowed for Northeastern, was in a national boat, rowed with Dan Lyons. And, he remarked one time, just amazed at how fit we were, as well as how diligent we were in doing the things that he would set down the national workout for us, and we would execute above and beyond what he thought little lightweights could handle.
Right.
And I took the notion that at other schools he wouldn't expect that output from his athletes.
I second what you're saying, Tom, about those two disciplines, the swimming or distance running, because you get the mental toughness in there. You push yourself in both distance running, whether it's up a hill, down a hill, you've got that. And then same thing with distance swimming in a pool or even sprint. It's both are highly aerobic, both are very disciplined, and that translates really well into a boat.
Yeah, that's a good point. That makes perfect sense. I tell you what, we've come to a pretty good stopping point here, so we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion of the lightweight team winning the national championship, and we'll be breaking down each of the three races. Stay with us. All right, welcome back, everybody. Carl Darden here with you, and I'm joined by Scott Gordon and Tom Callahan, two classmates and members of the Navy rowing team when we were back at the academy. Gordy was a member of the heavyweight team, and Tom rowed for the lightweights. So now I'd like to get into race day itself, and we're going to start with the conditions. You know, they weren't the best that day up in New Jersey, so I wanted to get you guys' take on how that impacts a race plan. So what are some of the concerns that might come up on a day where it's a little bit windy and you're kind of seeing some swells that are a little bit more than what you would like, and maybe even some, a few little caps on the water? What are some things that you got to be concerned with that on a day where it looks like glass out there that you wouldn't have to deal with? So Gordy, you can take that one first.
Gotcha, Carl. Thanks. Wind is a great equalizer. Everyone's going to have it. If it's a headwind, it's going to be at your back, so you're going to have to push into it. It helps you set the boat a little bit more, but it also is pushing against you. It's resisting you. When you get those white caps, then you're worried about how balanced your boat's going to be, and if your oar is going to smack as it's going from flat above the water to where you're feathering it to get square to then get a bite of the water to get that stroke. That choppy wake condition can actually flop your blade around, and it could mess you up a little bit. So you lose that crispness compared to a smooth day. But the Severn is a great training environment for rough weather. So we get it all there at the Severn. I should say they get it all. We used to get it.
Yeah, that's true. How about you, Tom?
Right. Yeah. And when I was watching the races, it is an outdoor sport. It's a water sport, and everyone takes the condition that's present. And ultimately, it's a matter of covering the 2,000 meters in the least amount of time, and actually covering the measured 2,000 meters. So, if your coxswain if there's a cross breeze and your coxswain uses too much rudder, you may go more than 2,000 meters when the other crew doesn't. Mm-hmm. And so, the headwinds or winding conditions can affect how efficient your stroke is, both from the hull and the directional, but then also from the synchronization with your fellow oarsmen if you're catching white caps. And they were rowing basically at about a 37 stroke per minute clip all the way down the course, and doing it, I think, very cleanly for the condition. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that headwind looked like about 20 seconds. So the race was about 20 to 30 seconds longer than what a slack day would be.
Right. Okay. All right. So now what I'd like to do is get some thoughts from both of you on each of the races, and we'll kind of do this two different ways. Number one, I'm going to ask you for a little bit of a top-line view of each team and how they accomplished what they did. And secondly, particularly when it comes to the heavyweight boat at the very end, because they're the ones that were probably the most challenged, I believe, of the three races.
The 1V.
Yeah, the 1V8 boat. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Let's start with the lightweight fours, though. And the one thing that really jumped out at me was basically their speed. I mean, they looked like they were like a dot on the horizon to everybody else pretty quickly, at least in rowing terms anyway. So I wanted to ask you guys, first of all, what do you make of that? First, that was pretty impressive to me. And secondly, what's the type of training that goes into developing that kind of speed over the course of 2,000 meters? And let's start with you, Gordy.
Well, the competition was there. It's just Navy seemed to have that fitness level, and they knew how to move their boat. And I think it goes back to what Tom had mentioned on how deep the squad is. Looking at one of the earliest races of the season, I think back in the end of March, 326, the lightweights boated 5 varsity 8s, and they raced Marietta, and they crushed them. Every boat crushed their competition. And in several of the races, it was really Navy 4V fighting the 5V. And that's where you get the competition nipping at the heels to produce a varsity 8, a JV 8, and then that 4. So I think it's all those other hungry lightweight rowers are what made all 3 of their boats that raced super fast. I think that's what that was. It was that competition within the squad. You take five groups, 8 guys, throw their coxswains in there. And they're in competition also. And they're racing for a lesser amount of spots. It was that internal competition that made them go fast.
Right. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, and the straight four. So that was a four with no coxswain that rode, and that again, making sure you have balanced pull, because you can, the bowman has the tow if they're going to steer the boat. So you don't want to have a lot of rudder action. You don't want to have to slack off. You want to have a balanced catch and balanced pull all the way down, so you're rowing straight and only going 2,000 meters. I think a four is also a great equalizer event for other schools. So we had Mercyhurst, and I don't recall who the other school was, but they could well have voted their best four oarsmen to go up against Navy's four, which I think traditionally you would think that they're the fifth set of four after the two sets in each of the eights. It doesn't have to be that way, but you could have our fifth set of fours against another school's first set of fours. And when you have a small program, you can come up with four great oarsmen. So it was any race where you have unknown competition, you just have to go out and execute. And I think they did a marvelous job. They were the defending champions of the straight four, having won the straight four and the four width in 2019 out in Sacramento. I'm not sure how many of the oarsmen might have been repeats. I think there were some. And also, I think some of those folks had a little bit of high school rowing before they got to Navy. But it was just a great race that, you don't know what's going to show up when you get to the starting line, and you have to execute your plan.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And moving on to, and kind of carrying that theme on, moving on to the 2v8 race, which was second. That one started out over the first, as I recall, the first 400 to 500 meters was fairly close. And then right around 500 to 600 meters, the 2v8 boat just seemed to find another gear, and they were off and running and didn't really look back. So based on what you saw, I look at those things and I said, okay, my novice eye is looking at two things. Number one, how well are they moving together and what their stroke rate is. Now, the nice thing is I had the benefit of the guy who's doing the commentating kind of yelling out the stroke rate well, not yelling out, but, reporting the stroke rate from time to time. But the other thing that I'll ask you guys to comment on is when you see a team just jump out and extend an advantage like that, talk to me a little bit about how much of that is stroke rate and how much of it is rowing efficiency. Can you assign a percentage to it? Or, what do you think about that? Tom, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think when you look at, for example, you watch that race and you look at where their puddles are going. So the stroke oar is basically reaching beyond the furthest most oar on its same side. So the two seat for if you're a port stroke. And so you want to make sure you're not stepping in the puddle of that bow pair because you want to get the length. Headwind is going to push you, so you're not getting as much run. But as you're watching the stroke rate, they were very much even between those boats, especially in that first 500, as you mentioned. And it was just a matter of getting a little bit more than that puddle in each of those strokes. You could see the challenges. I think UPenn and Princeton were the main contenders ultimately in both the 1V and the 2V, and their bios are loaded with accolades of national, international level pedigree before they got to their program. So I don't know how many walk-ons they had there, but if they did, they were probably national champions. But you want to see that you get that extra little bit of run, and I think Navy answered that. And sometimes the coxswain's looking at that, and if you have to take the stroke rate up, then you coax the stroke to notch it up one more to try to get a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Gordy?
I would say it was a lot of what Tom had mentioned. They had great competition, but I think they sat through the first 500, because you break the race up into four parts, the first 500, then you got the, second, third, and fourth final. But I think they saw where they're at after 500. I think it became tactical. Coxswain engaged the really good boat movers that could handle the conditions, and they went off. Princeton, they row up in Lake Carnegie, generally pretty protected. UPenn on the Schuylkill, generally pretty protected. Navy, we're on the Severn. We handle conditions really well against those crews that have more constrained water conditions. So I think it might have been the Navy light seasoning and then good tactical decision by the coxswain to really rev it up at that 600-meter mark.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Gordy, because it really does show how the decisions they make and when they make them can affect the outcome of a race. And that actually is a nice segue into the 1v8 race that I wanted to talk about, because as we were watching that one, obviously, it looked like, Penn started to mount a pretty good challenge between, I'd say, 1,000 and 1,750 meters. And if my distances are off, you guys can help me out there. But what I would like is for you guys to, the folks who are listening to the podcast, put them in the boat with you, okay, and describe what you're feeling physically, what you're seeing. All right, you're in there and you see a boat gaining on you. They've made up a couple of seats, so now that you've only got like a half a boat length lead, and now you're responding. So, Gordy, let's start with you. What sort of commands are you hearing from the coxswain, and what are you feeling physically, and what are you trying to do to respond to that challenge?
Well, let's see. You're trying to get air. Your legs are screaming at you, and you've got that lactic acid burn. You're trying to stay focused. You're definitely not going to be looking out of the boat, even though you might want to. And you're probably going to hear that coxswain going, "Okay, so they got a seat from us. We're going to take two back from them." Just kind of nothing negative. You're not going to say, "Yeah, they're walking right through us." You're going to have that coxswain going, "All right, they got a seat on us. We can take two back from them. Give me a power 10 on this one." Or we're going to go up for, give me a Go Navy 10 or something like that. Something motivational in there when you're getting a challenge. It was interesting to watch that, and I'm glad I could, review that when the questions came back. But as I was seeing the results come in, and I was watching these posts on Facebook from the many lightweights that I follow, and I'm like, oh wow, I must have watched it 10 times. It was great to see that. But your legs are burning. You're trying to breathe. You're not wanting to look out because you don't want to be that guy that screws up. You're pulling.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, and I think as Gordy said, it's the coxswain is helping you stay in the race. They're coaching you to think about your the clean strokes, to get a little bit more reach, to maybe take it up a notch, or to counter. And they did a great counter. I mean, you lose a seat or two when someone else starts to make a move. That's not an issue. It's like, they only got two seats. Okay, let's go show them. Throw down the hammer. We got 25 stroke left to go in the race.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give it to me. We've been here before. We have this conditioning, and they just responded and did a great job doing that. But as Gordy alluded to, I've been in a race before where the two-man threw his seat off the tracks and
wow.
Went to a dead stop with 100 yards to go, and lost the race. And so you want to make sure you're clean. You want to make sure that you're bringing that up and bringing it all the way home. They're tired too,
right?
And so you just want it to be over.
Yeah. That was pretty awesome. I was kind of tracking the day on the Navy Sports website, because I was doing some other stuff and I just couldn't get to the Facebook page and so forth to kind of track the progress. But that was just so cool to see when they won everything, especially having swept all three races. I mean, there's nothing more impressive than that. All right, very good. Listen, guys, we're going to start wrapping things up here a little bit, but I did want to make sure that I kind of get your take on what this national championship means to you guys as former rowers. I mean, first one since 2004, I think, and just kind of give me your feeling on what it means to you, and based on your connection to the program, what that means for the program moving forward. Let's go with Gordy first, and then we'll follow up with you, Tom.
Well, I'm really proud of them. Needless to say, it was an excellent strategy by the coaches. They powered through 2020. They built on that momentum from 2019, where they had some 4 victories at the IRAs. They got a bronze in the first varsity at the Eastern Sprints. They had a young crew, and they just kept on going forward. So I'm really proud of them. That the lights put it on the wall, and that's kind of something we would say at the boathouse. It was heavyweights, but applies to the women and the lightweights also. Is put it on the wall, put your picture on the wall. That's your championship picture, and they did, and it's really proud. It doesn't matter whether you're a heavyweight or a lightweight or a woman rower. You're a Navy oarsman, and you put it on the wall, and they did a great job doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the Navy boathouse is certainly storied with all of its Olympic crews through the 1900s, as well as certainly our classmates and 80, who all was in the boat, Gordy, some 85, some maybe in 86, that when they won the heavyweight 1V IRA in 1984, I was there for that race. It was awesome.
Yes, sir.
And I was so proud of them. When '04 the lightweights won, being added to the IRAs in 1997, that was incredible to do that, and to have the repeat and all the success they're having now is amazing. And when we look at lightweight rowing, just celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2019, and UPenn and Navy were the first race in 1919, and they raced again in 2019 at Navy. And Penn beat the lightweights by a hair. But in lightweight rowing, you're dealing with people who are the same size, using, let's say these days, the same equipment. And so it's all about how fit are you, how competitive are you, how clean is your rowing. And so I think it's very impressive to be able to come out and to complement what's going on in the women's rowing program and the heavyweight program, and it's great brotherhood of rowers in Hubbard Hall.
Right. And the one thing I'll add, and again, this goes back to one of the comments Coach Bagnall was saying, and to you as well, Tom. I mean, I think when you see this kind of result, and then you understand that, okay, a lot of these people had never held an oar in their hands before they showed up in Annapolis, and they're doing it and they're competing on that kind of an elite level in just, say, 2 years' time, because there's a couple of sophomores on those teams, more than a couple probably. So that, to me, from a popularity standpoint, will start kind of attracting more athletes as well. So I think that there's a lot of huge upside to a win like this as it relates to the future of the program itself. Okay, so last question I have for you guys, and then I'll give you a chance. I'll give you guys the last word here in a second. But how often do you guys get out on the water? I know, Gordy, you had mentioned that you are a mercenary instructor from time to time, but say on average during the course of, say, a season, whether it's spring, summer, or even a whole year, how often would you say you get out there?
Well, let's see if this season's a good example. I'm getting out 4 to 5 days a week if I'm not on business travel, and I'm having more of that now that COVID travel restrictions are easing, and same with family commitments, daughter sports or family events. So 4 to 5 days a week. Last year it was 0. I mean, as far as let's say I got on the water quite a bit in 2020, but no racing outside the area. So 4 to 5 days a week when it's clement weather and it's above 100 degrees combined air and water temperature.
Right. Okay. And Tom, how about you?
Last fall, I joined Gordy's outfit in Chesapeake, the Juniper Rowers, and it's a great group of master rowers. And I had a single shell in my backyard for 4 years that my son used in high school, and started putting it to work. So Scott and I were both on the water today before this call, and we were out there on the weekend. Beautiful water there in Chesapeake, and a very generous boatyard that allows us to use a facility to be able to put on the water and go out for rows.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah, I know that one thing I wanted to do. I'm planning a trip back to Annapolis in October. I got to pick the right weekend because I'm trying to pick a weekend where they not only have a home football game, but also there's a couple other sports going on in the yard where I can probably take some pictures. But one of the things I think I actually have a standing invitation from one of the folks at Hubbard Hall to come by and take some pictures and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to that trip. I don't know that there would be an opportunity to jump in a shell or anything like that, but still, I definitely am looking forward to that part of the visit and just learning more and more I can about the history of the program. So that's very, very cool. All right, last thing for you guys. Wanted to give you guys a chance to have the last word around any kind of things that you're doing around the Virginia area, around the peninsula. Do both of you guys live in Chesapeake, or?
I'm in Virginia Beach.
Okay, Virginia Beach, and then Gordy, you're in Chesapeake, or no?
Yes, I'm in Chesapeake. I think Tom and I are about 20 minutes apart.
Okay, all right, cool. So yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a chance to talk about some of the things you have going on, whether or not they're related to rowing.
I'll go ahead and take it first, and I'll keep it on rowing. There's so much water in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and Chesapeake, and unfortunately, there aren't enough boathouses or facilities. Much of Virginia Beach rowing uses somebody's backyard to be able to put in, and after 4 years or 10 years, the family has moved on, and the rowing program has to go find someone else's backyard.
Right.
So, many cities use old warehouses along the rivers or Corps of Engineering property or things like that. And I would just love if, we could find some way for a foothold to be able to get a place to put some boats so that we can have them rigged and ready to go, safe, and help support a high school and or a master's rowing program.
All right, very good. How about you, Gordy?
I fall pretty close in line with what Tom's saying. I am trying to grow my master's rowing club to eventually absorb the two high school related clubs, but then to kind of pull them into junior, so the junior program as opposed to being related to high school. Most high schools don't support their rowers like a varsity football program or baseball or basketball. It's in name only, and if they switch over to junior rowing, it's similar like junior AAU. It's better competition. It tracks closer to the national level of competition instead of just kind of local high school games. It's more at the higher competition level, and that's what I'm gearing up towards in this area.
All right. Well, that's good stuff, and hopefully, we'll start to kind of generate some momentum around that because. I did most of my reserve duty. I shouldn't say most. I did all of my reserve duty in Norfolk, so I'm very familiar with that area. My sister actually used to live right there in Langley, and it is a shame that there's not a lot more activity going on there as it relates to rowing, because certainly it's a prime area to do it, and hopefully you guys can really get that ramped up. So that sounds pretty good. All right, listen. Scott, Tom, thanks so much for being with us on the podcast. I really appreciate you guys sharing your insights as it relates to the lightweight team's national championship run, and then just generally educating us all on the sport of rowing. So thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Carl.
All right, take it easy, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be wrapping things up. All right, just a couple of admin things before we sign off. On our next podcast, we'll definitely pick back up with our preview of the Navy football team, and we're going to start with the defensive line and work our way back. And there's one other quick item I wanted to mention. One of the things that helps podcasts like this get a little bit more traction across the different platforms, like Apple, Spotify, and Google, is the reviews. So if you like what you've been hearing so far, I'd like to ask you to drop a 5-star review through whatever directory you guys get your podcasts on. That would really be great. I especially enjoyed today's conversation. Thanks again to Scott Gordon and Tom Callahan for sharing their rowing experience and helping me break down the Navy Lightweight Team's 2021 IRA National Championship. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. One quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. And by the way, the music used on the Navy Sports Central podcast comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great resource for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.